to it. Is there a use for structured analytic techniques in the private sector? Rob, let's start with you.
Absolutely. It's a foundational piece of our job profession. You're probably not going to get everyone inside your organization, asking whether or not you did ACH for your most recent product, or if this assessment has gone through Red Team. But if you have intelligence professionals in your team, it's a critical ask. And I know for our team, that comes into place for our major assessments, where we're really taking in all the different information and some assumptions based on what we're seeing kind of globally into consideration as far as operational impact. I would say where it impacts us the most is usually every off season, and that for us is between April and June. We really sit down and kind of do threat rankings to see what exactly we believe is going to impact us based on the geopolitical environment, based off of any threats that we saw over the past season, and we try to scope and scale out what we think those impacts are going to be for the upcoming season, because that's going to drive a lot of our production, our insights to the threat or whatnot, and we will murder board that all day and really try to draw out why do we believe that this is going to be the case, and draw that evidence because we know, particularly in our case, there's no one else that's going to really question that on the intelligence side, inside of the NFL. But if folks start building decisions off of that, we have to have some ability to justify those assessments and really try to base that as much as possible with everything that's out there. You're never going to be 100% correct, but you're expected to be as dialed in as humanly possible. So long story short, absolutely.
Oh, I have so many questions that I could draw from that, including the threat rankings versus rankings of threat actors, for example. That would be something interesting to dive into. And then also confidence levels. And I also want to hear from Angela and Ross on the structured analytic techniques. So Ross, let's turn it over to you.
Yeah, I'll echo everything that Rob said. To my mind, you cannot do analysis without some form of structured analytic technique. Full stop. Especially if you're providing analysis to key decision makers where they're going to be making decisions off of it. Analysis, by its nature, is going to have an error rate in it. It's going to be forward projecting. And so if you don't have the structure, if you don't have a process that you can point to and say, this is how we've arrived at this answer, this is how we stress tested it, you're basically just shooting in the dark. And I'm really glad that he used the term murder board, because if he didn't, I was going to bring it up. It's a fantastic exercise. And if you're not stress testing your own analysis, especially for the more strategic pieces, the more business impacting pieces, you're probably not really doing the analysis to the level that it should be. And that isn't to say you're going to be using these techniques for everything you produce. And that goes back to the earlier conversation about finished versus raw intelligence. If you're pushing indicators to a SOC, you're not going to be running structured analytic techniques on all of those kind of flash reports that you're pushing. But anything that is forward-looking, anything that's using probabilistic language, anything that should have a confidence statement associated with it, if you're going back to OD&I standards, you want to run through at least a murder board and make sure you have your structured analytic techniques down. Otherwise, you're going to miss big at some point, and that's going to have really bad implications, not only for your company, but also for the reputation of intelligence as a field in the private sector, because it is still very nascent, especially when you're talking on the security side of the house.
Spoken like somebody who might have spent some time at the NIC. Angela, thoughts?
So it's interesting because our team doesn't typically sit down and do structured analytic techniques. However, all of the concepts in a structured analytic technique are embedded within our thinking and how we're going about something. So, Robert kind of brought up, nobody's going to ask you, did you sit down and do, red hat analysis on this or what have you? Typically that's not how we operate. But questioning everything, kind of looking at that, trying to see where our biases are, coordinating across the board, we do a lot of peer review, which means that every single person has an opportunity to weigh in and say, hey, have you thought about this? Have you looked at this? Really asking a lot of those in-depth questions and doing it in a way that, makes the product always better. I think that's the critical piece for us. And so it's that critical thinking, but it's informed by all of the concepts that are sort of embedded in structured analytic techniques. So, while we may not sit down and, do we are going to sit down and do X, that is a structured analytic technique, the thinking behind it is absolutely a part of everything we do.